Test, test. Testing, testing.
been me. We'll ride through that way once in a while. That little park has turned out so well.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
Mike, how are you?
Doing well, Dan. How are you?
Doing great.
Probably have some people to start.
We can wait a few minutes and see. Jesse usually shows up.
I have not. I'm assuming he's coming up. Will you just back up over to the meeting? He didn't reach out, so I'm assuming, should we wait a couple of minutes?
We can.
Say the word when you think we should start. So what's
Should we
what's
wait a
the word
couple
on
of
Butlerville
months?
Day?
Do that too.
Feel like Butlerville Days turned out okay?
I think it did, yeah.
Yeah.
Fireworks. Cool.
I only heard good things, so.
You're not a dog.
Yes.
It was pretty impressive. It was probably
Yeah.
50% larger than we've ever had it.
Pretty awesome.
That would be my dream, is to have only public fireworks. Only.
Yeah, programs.
I have a lot of.
Hey, Jesse. How are you doing? Good, how are you?
Our neighbors on the fourth, oh my gosh, they must have gotten everyone together and spent $5,000. It was like endless and they were huge and they had this pile the size of like a car out in front of their house after it was done.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh,
We do
Can't
that with some
imagine.
people that are around the corner only for New Year's, though.
do you though? You
Because of
pile
where we are,
everything.
they're never gonna be allowed. It's too close to the.
Yeah.
It's just not worth risking.
They're so expensive. That's the
They
thing.
are.
Spend, $500, you get 3 fireworks. And you're like, wow.
And we don't throw in, but we do support it with our eyeballs. So, so. So that Y chromosome comes with a predisposition like fire. So sorry about that. So I've met more men than women that are like something about lighting something on
On
fire,
fire.
and watching it blow up. There's a little dopamine that comes from that.
Is that what it is? Okay.
I take, well, my daughter, my daughter's a mechanical engineer and she likes blowing things up too, but
Yeah, okay, there you go. There you go. I get it for dinner, down my dog.
I get it. I totally get it. My dog's oblivious, but she's kind of oblivious to a lot of things. So,
Oh,
not-
that's cool.
yeah, she would survive for about 2 hours in the wild. So she's fully domesticated.
That's funny.
We can start. Okay, time, yeah. Heather, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Let me just push go. Okay, my stuff is live. You're on too. Okay.
All right, we'll call to order the working meeting for the planning commission meeting on August 3rd. We will be discussing the items on the agenda, as well as if anybody else has anything else we need to discuss. The 2 items on the agenda for the business meeting tonight are, the first one is a public works building site plan approval. And the second one is the sleds ordinance. Some context on the sleds ordinance, we postponed taking action on that last meeting so that we could bring on our new members. So now that you guys are on board, we can potentially take action on that item tonight. So Mike, do you have a preference of which one we talk about first?
We need the public works building and then
Okay.
spend the rest of the time on any follow-up questions with sensitive lines.
All right, does anybody have any other item to add to the working meeting tonight? All right, then staff, you go ahead and.
Okay, sure. I'll give a quick overview of the request and have to answer questions. We do have Chris Childs here with us. He's the architect on the project. to answer questions as well as needed. So first item on tonight's agenda is site plan approval for Public Works Building Addition 6579 South 30th East. You can see it off of 30th East. When you drive by, we've got the street view there for reference. This is where the Public Works Department stores the snow plows. They have the salt for the snow plows and a small amount of storage space in that building that you can see on the screen currently. The proposal is to expand that existing building, the new 21,645 square foot building addition, new parking lot, some landscaping and improvements to the street. This expansion will provide some indoor storage areas where the snow plows can be kept, as well as office space for our Public Works Department. The 3D rendering on the screen will give you a feeling for what the finished product looked like. So a little bit of information on why it's here tonight for the Planning Commission review as a site plan approval. This is not a conditional use permit, so we're not looking to impose additional conditions tonight. But the way that our ordinance is written, site plan approval is required for any governmental or quasi-governmental use. So because this is a governmental use, it needs to be reviewed tonight. Again, it's a permitted use in the zone, so not a conditional use. What we're trying to do is an administrative review of the application for compliance with the requirements of the ordinance. So we'll just go through. I can maybe just quickly go through these right now, and we can go through it in more detail as needed. And of course, again, we'll go over it in the business meeting. But you've got all the information in your packet. It's been reviewed by staff. Setbacks meet the minimums required in the public facility zone. The one that's right on the setback is this one right here, 20 feet. The lot lines you can see kind of jut in towards the edge of the building, but it's been designed with the setbacks in mind, conforms to those requirements. Maximum lot coverage is 50%. This building covers about 16% of the lot. Maximum height is 35 feet to the highest point of the roof. It's a flat roof, 28 feet tall. Parking areas were evaluated using the closest land use we could find in the parking code. The parking generation manual has warehousing as one of the uses listed, which is for storage facilities and associated office space. That was about the closest comparable use that we could find. That would have required 15 parking stalls. There are 16 stalls proposed in addition to the snowplow storage area. We reviewed it for compliance with our outdoor lighting standards. There are requirements for the average illumination, total site illumination meets all of those requirements. Maximum height for light fixtures is 25 feet. So the parking lot lights, those poles, you can see the detail on the screen, be 25 feet, full cutoff LEDs. And then the landscaping, like I said, is there's some new landscaping areas in the front of the building along the street with trees and shrubs and grasses. Some of the landscaping requirements that we have are for 50% coverage of plant material. And then no more than 20% of the total landscaped area can be used for lawn areas in commercial zones or other zones. So no lawns being proposed. There is landscaping being proposed in the areas that are highlighted in green. It's got trees and shrubs, and then I think the remainder of the areas that don't have shrubs are, I believe, planted with a native seed mix. Those are the main requirements that we've reviewed this for. We find that the application meets the minimum requirements. We recommend approval. Have some model motions for you when you need, but that's the overview for that one. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, I have a couple. The only thing I had well, two things I had questions on. One is the entrance and exit onto 30th East. Because that's 30th East is a nightmare of a street. So is there, I saw street improvements. Is that mainly for sidewalks
I
and?
think, yeah, curb
Yeah.
gutter side, there's sidewalk on this northern chunk up to the intersection. But yeah,
I mean,
just-
can we say, is it possible to say like no left turn or something onto 30th East out of the building? I'm sure this is minimal traffic coming in and out of this building. But I'm just concerned that 30th East is very, pretty narrow, a lot of bikes. No sidewalk right now on that side of the street, but I mean, I know it's proposed there will be. I don't know. I just want to air that concern. And if there's nothing that can be done, then.
I don't, I'm not exactly sure. I think that we could probably,
We can recommend it with these permitted uses.
Yeah,
It's a little odd that the code has these come to planning commission because we certify that it meets code. and
oh,
planning
okay.
commission.
Well, then I'll just air my,
The only thing I'll say is the impact of the use is there today. There's staff that are there today. The trucks are all there today. So the traffic generation won't be different. They'll just have a permanent building instead of a, portable.
but
trailer.
now they use that smaller side street, I think, that
Yeah.
has the light that goes like over to Market Street.
They'll still be able to.
Yeah,
Just adding, I think all the trucks will still use that, because that's just
and the
a little
30th,
parking area.
so do you envision probably that the 30th East entrance would be for people, not employees, but for people probably
Public
coming?
visiting. You can
Public,
see the-
yeah.
Yeah, the small parking area, but all the
Yeah.
industrial equipment and
Okay.
vehicles will use that signal.
Okay.
it does still require full building permit. We'll have staff review, so we haven't gotten through that. City engineer will continue to have opportunity to look at this, so at the very least, we can mention that your concerns came up during the meeting and look into it.
Does this go on to the city council?
No. Just site plan approval from the planning commission.
So functionally, it sounds like it's gonna be used for the same thing it's already being used for, but 35 feet is pretty high, and I would say just living adjacent there, predating me, the last time that, the 88 people in my neighborhood rallied together was when the business park that was on the Holiday side was built, and it ended up being higher than expected. And 35 feet is substantial. So in terms of impact, in terms of the physical impact, I can see that, but the visual impact and it won't affect my world, but there's a row of homes of about a dozen homes that they're 35 feet will be significant. So I mean, I'm not sure how we assess that. It's showing 28 here, but I heard 35.
35 is the maximum, and yeah, so it's been designed to 28 feet.
Because 35 is our code, right?
Permitted
Yeah,
maximum.
permitted. Okay.
This will also sit down lower too, right? I mean, because the back of those homes are kind of above.
Well, depending on how they excavate it, because I mean, that was partially what happened in the business park was that once everything got excavated, what the effective grade was, and everybody claimed that they'd put a stake in the ground, and that stake never moved from what it was originally engineered at. There's some speculation about where it started and where it landed in terms of what the grade, the pre-construction grade was. So I just throw that out there, and I don't know if they're just if we're gonna do this right, I mean, just from a visual standpoint, 30th East has become a pretty major gateway in and out of Cottonwood Heights. Do we want to consider, and this isn't in the purview of what the request is, but visually, what do we want that to look like? What do we want to be staring at? And I love the architect's renderings for that reason. It's going to be a dramatic upgrade, and the wear and tear on the equipment's, obviously getting it inside. My last question is, the parking, if we've got if we're running all of our snowplows simultaneously, it's, those 16 stalls, that's not for employees, right? That's for people beyond employees. Because we get, when we've got all hands on deck, there's a whole boatload more than 16 people that are in and out of that area. So 16, I understand the calculation, but the effective, I mean, the public works people, I'd love to know what they would say, you know, on, and with the growth and just, you know, what's our high water mark? I think it's more than 16 when we get everybody coming and going.
I think our architect may be able to expand on that. I know, I believe it was designed this way specifically for the number of employees that we have. There are not a lot of visitors that come by
Yeah,
this
agreed.
side, so it's.
Agreed.
There's
Pretty
12
much-
plow trucks.
Yeah.
So do you want the architect to come up? This is city initiated, so he kind of represents us here.
Yeah.
Instead of floundering, we can just have him come up, yeah.
You jump to the overall site plan, Andy.
Let's make sure you're hot on the mic here.
So what's not shown on the site plan is around, I don't know what street that is, around the backside, we've got actually 2 parking canopies that are scheduled to house, I believe, up to 20 more vehicles along that backside. So that would be anticipated that the employee parking would be back there in the secure part of the facility. And really anything up front is visitors, whether it be city employees or outside vendors, whatever it may be, coming to Public Works, would be using really that front. And then everything else, employees would be kind of back of house there, housed back there.
So the 16 are more in front?
Correct, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, so the 16 are,
For
yeah,
visitors.
just to the kind of northwest there. Yeah, right all in there. So that's really the public that we're looking, the public integration part. And then back of house along the curve, that radius there, we do have scheduled 2 different parking canopies that would be anticipated for smaller work trucks and then employees as well.
That to me makes a lot more sense, just because, I mean, if they're gonna do a staff training, for example, even people that are on shifts. And potentially people from this building too, there's gonna be a need to have more vehicles than 18 and even more than the full staff. So, and anyway, I figured you guys didn't anticipate that. Anything you can speak to in terms of just the views from the different.
From the adjacent?
You know,
Yeah, we should actually be pretty low. What's really dictating the elevation of this building is the existing structure there, because we're building essentially where it ties in to the structure that we see here. So that's really dictating where our building level 100 or 0 level is at. And so we are actually quite a bit down below the UDOT property to the south there. So I don't think we should really have any view shed problems. I believe we've got a pretty hefty retaining wall on that south corner. I believe we're retaining at least 6 to 8 feet. So I mean, that puts the building, 20 foot from, natural grade where it is here. And we are at the base of that hill there. So I don't think we shouldn't have any real view shed problems. Because of that, we are at that base, and then we are kind of inset down in there and on the side.
taking advantage of the fact that we're improving this property, as a second, +1 to that the walkability of 30th East is a huge issue in that area. So again, I'll point us back to the Strava heat map. There's an enormous amount of activity, and then people that are having to cross back and forth, north and south of there. And this is a good argument to really do well, the chunk from there all the way along that property. And frankly, if we've got the dollars to just extend it like another 50 yards to connect it in with the neighborhood at the top of the hill. So I would just say, let's take advantage of it to really, really improve that shoulder the way that we would idealize it. So as we map out the whole, the bike lanes, the walkability, and I love the landscaping plan. So
Why does the sidewalk not continue east? Or south, sorry.
There's no sidewalk further up 30th, and I think it
Until you get to the
dead
top of the
ends
hill.
at like there's a retaining wall up there. We could probably pull up the
I
street.
mean, there's a little tiny sidewalk that's on the east side of 30th East that you can, that maybe, I don't know why. It's not a standard kind of sidewalk, but
Is 30th a state road or a city road?
City road.
And is there ability to add sidewalk further east? Not part of this project, but in the future? Or is it just there will never be a sidewalk because of property lines?
I think that we could probably require it.
Yeah, I think there's always an ability. We look at our, our streets plan to see where it is, and if it's. You can cross people safely and walk them up the west side and it's easier there. Yeah, that's something we look at, as as the area develops along there.
Even approaching UDOT with their, if it's a property line issue, like Chair's pointing out that maybe there's an ability to work together on something collaboratively. Just at the same time, rather than piecemealing it. I mean, I think UDOT would probably be amenable. I mean, anyway.
I'd say,
having a conversation.
it's always possible. It's how much of a priority is it to the city council to invest in what it would take to retrofit the area to accommodate it.
So
It is along the west side.
I think that's the issue I wanted to talk about was kind of the bigger impact. I think Chris has done a good job with the building, and this is probably the nicer piece of infrastructure that's been put down there. But the bigger issue is that this is, like you said, an entryway into the city. It's connected to the trail. It's the reservoirs there. I mean, this is an important part of our city. And for the city to be, and I know there's other partners like UDOT involved, but we aren't really investing in that area from a visibility standpoint. And it seems like an area that should be given more attention. Maybe to screening or landscaping. I know that's additional funding that comes out of the city's pocket, but and there's probably no mechanism for the planning commission. There is no mechanism for the planning commission to require that. But I think it's a bigger conversation for the city to have about how does this entrance to our city look, and how is the infrastructure to that is city owned impacting that entrance.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I think, outside the scope of this application, the commission does have some ability to make recommendations to the council, or maybe the city manager. I'll have to look it up. The general plan is upon us soon as well, and we can, kind of hit it there. Maybe expanding the gateway designation that we have today down 30th East to include that. It's not in the gateway zone right now, so that, that stuff doesn't loop in, but
That's a really good view right there. That's, if you could just find a way to eliminate the bottom half of that and just see the mountains, everybody would be grateful. Not just Cottonwood Heights residents, everybody that drives up and down that road, that walks up and down that road, that visits, and it's like, again, especially something that we have so much control over. We talk so much about things that we have very little control over. This one, just making sure that the visual side of it, works.
Is the height of the building, the new proposed building, similar to the height of the building on the left, the city's existing building?
We are, trying to remember how tall we are there. We're probably about 1.5 times taller than that, I believe. So I think like 816. So we're probably not. Yeah, we're probably not 1.5 times. I'm guessing.
1.5 times the
Times the existing.
total
building.
height.
Yeah,
And this building will be concealing that building. Is that correct?
Correct.
This is
Yes.
all built behind.
correct. Yeah.
I think when we had the conversation about the sidewalks, just looking up there, so this is the city public works yard, and then UDOT has this space. And as you go up, it's just this,
The shoulder.
it's just a shoulder. And I think the concern was that there may not be room for a side, even in the future. Without, I don't know, maybe.
Do you think do you think it actually
No, we don't-
deters, if we put a sidewalk on that east side, it will deter us pushing business and walkability to the Market Street area and some of those other areas? I feel like it's relatively synergistic down at that spot. So if we put a sidewalk over there, it might shift flow because now you're walking by a public works building versus retail building. So I'm just thinking of putting a sidewalk there, if that's an advantage or a disadvantage. Because that's such a large sidewalk on
The
the.
sidewalk
like
goes
this.
down, it goes down and then would curve around and goes across the street from Market Street, but it doesn't.
Yeah, right now the sidewalk is only on the one side going down that way. You know, I think ultimately more sidewalks, always a good idea if possible, and I think that was the concern that the city had was. We improved the plan show sidewalk, you know, just connecting from the building, there's. The pedestrian plan for the building, for anyone who's on the new site, will be able to comfortably walk to the business areas. But, you know.
Andy, can you look up that street again, just point it the other way? So. Okay, I'm just looking at the turn lanes to see if there's any space to be had. In all honesty, as a cyclist, when you're going uphill, you need a bike lane, but going downhill, it's less important. It's just like in the Cottonwood Canyons. There's a big shoulder on the right-hand side as you're going east, but you're coming down. The bikes going downhill can comfortably and safely, it's actually better for them to move into the lane of traffic. So anyway, it may require some creativity with UDOT, frankly, to be able to see if who owns that Jersey barrier and how much effective space there is on the other side of the Jersey barrier too.
But I think my comment earlier is more about the blue tanks and the stuff that's not within this project necessarily.
Yeah.
Addressing that infrastructure and how that's screened.
Sure.
Are we doing solar with this?
No,
Was that discussed at all? Like just in terms of energy usage for that building?
It
Will we
was-
that much space on a roof?
It was at one point, I mean, this project's been ongoing since I believe 2016.
Mhm.
So there's been a couple different iterations over the last 6 years on it. We typically, the storage canopies would be one of the ones that we target for, sizing so that you could put PV on later. The building, I believe there is the potential, we do have square footage on that, on the main vehicle storage area to do it. We could make sure that everything's just sized to accept, an array of solar on top, but I believe as part of the project, having solar included in the building of the project wasn't part of the overall design parameters.
If we could leave the possibility down the road, even if we don't do it now for financial reasons, I think we don't want to be 10 years down the road and have the ability to do it and decide.
well, that's what happened here.
Mm,
Built in 2016 and now solar's installed on the roof.
That's perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
That same process, I appreciate that. We don't have to do everything now, but I mean, it's same thing with the barriers and the visual stuff. We could do it piecemeal but let's make sure stepwise that we clear the space that it can be a very good, entrance into the city.
Any other questions or comments on the application?
Will you spin to the setback picture again?
Yes. Hold that back up.
I think
John, where's Sandra?
it's helpful for some of the public who are here to hear that we thought this through. So this building will not be impacted, but the ordinance that we'll consider next applies to this building in that the creek is right on the other side of that road. It's the bank is within 60 feet, maybe
About 70.
between 60 and 70 feet of the corner of that building. And for me, when I saw that, the first thing I thought is, having read the headline of our next item, you can't build that building there. It won't comply. It won't meet the standard of the SLEDS ordinance.
Yeah.
But as we looked at it, It does meet the requirements of the SLUD ordinance, even the most stringent requirements that could be applied to it under the ordinance. It appears to me anyway, and I believe to Mike, that it would meet those requirements. And so it's easy to get caught at the headline and say 150 feet, that building has to be 150 feet from the stream bank. That's not what the SLUD's ordinance says. So it might be helpful to some of the public to know that the city will comply with the same things we ask for them. And that this building does, in fact, comply.
We are doing some existing code sensitive lands study. Was it a hydrology study or something that?
I think it's in the shallow groundwater and the liquefaction areas. So we do have a sensitive land study ongoing right now, and that'll be required as part of the permit. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point.
Commissioner Evler, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, just a couple things. I just wanted to second Commissioner Mills's comments about the bike lanes and if you had to cheat. It's the speed limit's pretty low at the top of the hill, and it's pretty easy for most general cyclists to meet, if not exceed, just by coasting down the hill. So most cyclists would just take the regular vehicle lane rather than the bike lane. I've walked up and down this hill probably 50 to 100 times in the last 10 to 12 months. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot is that when I start up at the top of the hill up on Fort Union, most of the time I'm walking down, I'm hitting the trail and going over. And so like if there was a sidewalk on the other side, that's the side I'm going to go on. What's problematic is you walk down the sidewalk on the west side, and then you sit at the light for 3 to 5 minutes waiting for it to turn. And there's an encouragement of pedestrian vehicle interactions just because of jaywalking and whatever else, because the light just doesn't cycle all that often when you're sitting there. And it's just something that from my own personal experience I've seen. And so like any opportunities we have in terms of creating the more robust pedestrian opportunities on the east side, I would welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Anything else for Chris? All right, we'll move on to the next item. Should we, do you guys want to give a summary for the new commissioners? Or what? Or do you guys want to just ask questions, or what would be most efficient?
I have some slides that just, go over what's in the packet, the latest updates over the last month. The full text of the ordinance went out with the packet. I know it's a lot to take in, but I think, we're happy to maybe just go over the current changes and then answer any questions that you might have. That would work.
Okay. Can we start with just, do you have any burning questions just out of the chute? It just seems that you want to make sure you highlight.
I have an idea that I would like to propose, but
And I think it's pretty straightforward. This is from Salt Lake City's ordinance, is that correct?
Yeah, maybe I'll give a one step back. The whole sensitive lands ordinance process, it's called SLEDS. It stands for Sensitive Lands Evaluation and Development Standards. It is a very meaty ordinance that includes regulations that are used and triggered when areas redevelop if there are potential natural hazards on the site. That includes the riparian protection zone that was previously referenced in this ordinance but didn't exist anywhere. But that also includes areas that are subject to high groundwater or liquefaction potential or landslide, rockfall, fault hazards, steep slopes. It's a bunch of different hazards in the city. And when you look at the sensitive lands overlay map, it covers, I don't know, a third of the city for one reason or another. And the whole ordinance has been in place for a number of years now and has been successful. And we've just been tasked with updating it to include the best practices for how we study and regulate each of those hazards. So we've spent, since January, I think, with the commission, step by step going through each of the different hazards listed in the ordinance and taking feedback and making adjustments and doing more research and bringing that. The focus tonight is updates to the riparian section of that, but that's just one element of it. And the updates were made at the request of the commission at the last meeting. So that'll be the focus tonight, but just understand there's a whole, the riparian pages are, 5-10% of the whole ordinance.
And if there are comments about other sections, of course, we're happy to look into that, answer any questions you have about those as well.
So I can just make my recommendation easily. So to me, it seems like public facilities should meet the highest standard that we impose on anyone, especially as it relates to sensitive lands. And any standard that we are willing to impose on others, we as the steward of public lands ought to meet it. And so I would propose that we add the PF zone to the most stringent of the requirements of the.
Okay, that's a perfect segue into some of these updates. So maybe I could just highlight for the benefit of those in attendance, what we're talking about today. At the last planning commission meeting, we had several comments from the public. People essentially asking, is there any way to increase these buffer areas? The riparian protection ordinance establishes buffers certain distances from the top of bank of any waterway in the city where development is allowed or not allowed, depending on the area. Previously, all zones were under the same buffer up to the maximum area of 125 feet to be considered in the riparian protection area. But as a response to that last meeting, request from the commission to investigate, would it be possible to maybe expand that? We did look at the different zones, and essentially the ones with smaller lot sizes weren't feasible. The larger ones, we are now proposing an expanded buffer zone. So that the F zones, that stands for forestry, RR stands for rural residential, and CR is regional commercial. Those zones all have a minimum, CR is a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size. That RR 121 is 21,000 half acre lot size. So all of these ones are larger. They require about a half an acre, which would require, just based on those lot sizes and the lot width standards, minimum depth that would potentially be able to support these buffers. And so the latest draft proposes an increase in this first buffer area A. As you can see below, what's proposed for all other zones is what we had previously been reviewing, which is 25 feet in the first area, and then up to 50 feet for area B, 100 for C, and 125 for D. Now that first area is proposed in the larger zones to be increased to 50, and then the other buffer areas the same distances from that point. And so I think the public facilities zone has a smaller lot size, but it's probably something that could include. I don't know if we have any concerns or objections to that. Usually the projects in the public facilities zone are larger, like what we're just looking at. So there's usually space to work with. As just a quick summary of the areas, we can pull up the full list and go over it if you want, but basically area A is the area where no structures are allowed. I think flat structures like a flat open deck are allowed, but generally no building in A. B allows accessory buildings, small sheds, things like that. C is where new single family homes will be permitted. And then It's limited based on our previous discussions of the footprints, the square foot to 2,000 square feet within that area C. If someone wants to build a larger house than that with a larger footprint, any area of the footprint beyond that amount would have to be in the D, buffer D, area D. So that's a general overview. Of course, we've got more detailed information we can go through if you have questions.
What is maximum areas? Let's go back to that in area B. What is your max building envelope there?
It's only allows accessory structures less than 200 square feet.
Okay.
So just really small
So
sheds.
ADUs will not be allowed in area B?
No, those would need to be area C.
Okay.
I think the intention here is you want to protect the stated purpose is to protect these waterways and the natural ecosystem there. And when you have habitable structures closer to the waterways, you know, that is jeopardized. I do want to point out, though, I think we talk about a lot about what's not allowed. This table has, 100 different squares in it with all the areas multiplied by the uses. There are nine squares that have an N, which means whatever's in that square is not allowed, and it includes things like pesticides and fertilizers and compost and livestock. The structure limitations do exist, and some things are allowed with some regulation, but it's not an intention by the city, even in this draft, to prohibit a bunch of activities along the creek. It's just those that are the most impactful to that natural ecosystem and the health of the waterways. I think there's some perception out there that we're trying to clamp down and tell people they can't do anything on their property, and it's not like that. It's just there's some regulations. There are some things that we've found and we've recommended not allowing because they're not good for those waterways. And then there are other things that we think are allowed but require a closer review before we say go ahead. So
And what was the thinking behind going from 100 feet to 125? I mean, that's probably the biggest impact in area A. You doubled the distance.
that was direction from the commission at the last meeting, was to see if there was a way to increase these buffer zones. I think the public sentiment and the prompt to staff was see if we can increase it for everything. Staff, as Andy said, some of these smaller your R18 areas that have smaller total lot sizes, we didn't feel comfortable imposing those regulations that could cover an entire lot and make just normal use difficult. So the recommendation we came back with is, well, for the larger lots that have more size and dimension, we can expand it. But again, that wasn't in the last draft. That was a request made at the last meeting.
Is there any way that we could do conditional use permits in area A where there'd be an impact study done if somebody did want to, let's say, build something that is allowed in area B or C, to then have some guidelines that go into area A? Just because I'd imagine that there's some that are already grandfathered in area A currently.
Yeah, so there's a whole section here on grandfathered uses and modifying those and expanding those. There's a process to do that. It's the same as any non-conforming building in the city. Regarding what you want to impose and where, that's totally up to the commission to make that recommendation to staff and then on to the city council. This is just where this has led us to this point based on the months of feedback we've gotten.
Is there any science between 25 and 50 feet? Is there any reason to believe that the impact is significantly different between 25 and 50 feet? Is there?
We as a commission felt like there was pretty strongly, actually. Like the undeveloped pieces of land, like next to Big Cottonwood Creek, Little Cottonwood Creek, the places where we could have very, very large structures where potentially wastewater can go into the creek. We felt like we needed to protect some of that stuff that's not developed yet. So there was a lot of intention trying to take the last developable pieces of land and trying to say, we don't want to hamstring a developer from doing something, but it needs to be thoughtful and it needs to not be, the creek overflows, it floods, and then it comes back down. And this seemed like a pretty reasonable thing to say, you shouldn't build right up to the edge. And the people who have built up to the edge that would be grandfathered in, most of them regret being as close as they are. And we've heard stories If you've listened to the previous meetings, that there are people that would say, if I had to do it over again, I probably wouldn't be as close as I am, and this is probably too close. And so, yeah, putting a buffer in at least 25, just to protect the fact that whether it's wildlife or, water and the existing structure, and this is dramatically more conservative than what happens literally 50 yards up the road on the other side when it's national forest. So the fact that suddenly, wham, you can go right up to the creek. We've probably been a little too close to the creek as it is. In Jordan River, other water bodies in Salt Lake County, we thought, let's give it a little buffer. We don't want to tie the hands of developers, but yeah, there was lengthy discussion for months about this, just in terms of history.
And do you think that the development concern you're talking about there relates to these rural residential parcels? I mean, the zones that you're applying the most stringent restrictions to are these rural residential and forestry, which
Those are
I don't-
also residential.
So these are just the zones with the highest minimum lot sizes. I think the intention is the most strict regulation is probably that area C, limiting the amount of footprint of a new primary structure. That's not going to affect existing homes. That will affect, new areas that are developed, and there's a lot of undeveloped land along Big Cottonwood Creek. So I think that was kind of the rationale there. Is staff didn't feel comfortable recommending the 150-foot boundary for an area that may just have a lot that's 100 feet deep, and and that's the whole lot that's encumbered, and you're limiting the size that a home can be. So this is, the rationale is, can we push this? How far are we comfortable pushing it where we can objectively say, yeah, this does have a benefit in protecting the waterway? And again, geared around new areas that are yet undeveloped, while still allowing people that live in these areas, to modify their houses and remodel and expand and, do those things.
I think that probably the most valuable numbers to look at here are the line between B and C. C is where new structures start. And so, it boils down to, do we want a new construction to be allowed 50 feet from this creek or 75? And so the direction we received was, see how far that buffer could be established without taking away, making lots unbuildable. So based on the sizes, this is what staff's proposed based on that. But of course, open to have your feedback and input on all of this. We just have a few minutes left before the next meeting, so if it's all right, maybe just touch on a few other small changes that we're looking at tonight, and then leave some time for questions. One recommendation from the commission was to add licensed surveyor to the list of people who could establish where that top of bank is when we're reviewing permits. Previously, it just had hydraulic engineer, hydrologist, wetland scientist, fluvial geomorphologists. And so licensed surveyor is a little bit more of a common professional that should be accessible for people just working on building permits. And then establish that the development review committee, the city staff, would be able to request these verifications take place. The previous draft said, should a party wish to verify or dispute it, they can use the professionals. And so this way, it's not just if, up to whoever, if they want to do it, it's if the city through their analysis requires more verification, we can ask for it. But that could be done by a surveyor. We talked a little bit about non-conforming uses already tonight. There is the section in the code allowing non-conforming uses to remain. If your house is in one of those buffer zones that's closer than what we would allow for a new home, it's considered to be non-conforming. You can maintain any existing buildings in any of the zones. If you're expanding to a non-conforming use, you can do so following a process. I think the most important section in the code says the expansion cannot be closer to the water than the closest point of what's existing. We made a few updates to that section just to add references to the state code and the city code to clarify that it's not its own separate approval, but that it just follows the normal non-conforming use approval with a few additional riparian standards. And then no new changes proposed to the other sections. So as we mentioned, it's a long chapter with many different hazard areas, not only the riparian buffer. We didn't have any really strong or specific direction on the rest of it. So that is remaining the same as what you've seen in the past. Those are the major changes that have been considered. We've got a few minutes left if anyone
Just a reminder
has
on this one,
questions.
it's a legislative item, so this goes on to the city council, and then the city council does this whole process with review and public input and feedback and changes. They do that over again until they're ready to make a decision. So
Yeah,
just because the hearing here is closed doesn't mean there's not going to be more months of opportunity for public input.
I just ran into this ordinance on a project in another city in the county, and their ordinance has a 50-foot requirement that prevents any new structure from being within 50 feet of the top of bank. But they also include parking facilities in that definition. And it made me think that maybe we need to add some more language about drive access because the way Samantha just explained this to us is it's about the permeability of water in these zones. And so if we're putting a big asphalt drive through this area, that would sort of go against what we're trying to accomplish. So it was one thought that I don't want to belabor this any longer in the planning commission, but I do think that would be a good recommendation for you to address as you move into the city council, should you move into the city council.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. We can look at that.
Thanks for all the work on this, you guys.
Any other questions or comments on sleds? All right, do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll see you in the next room in 6 minutes.
You're then.
8 minutes if you're running on Jesse.